Tonight's talk is just a simple, light subject, overcoming suffering, and I'm going to take a lot from a book about the Holocaust, so we're keeping it nice and fun tonight. This is the question of the week: is how do we overcome suffering? And this talk either has to be real short or very long. We're going to do the short version tonight. It's going to be a short talk and a longer meditation. I talk about usually more like the logistics. First of all, just generally, I'm much more comfortable talking about the logistics of practice and meditation rather than the feeling and the real scary stuff, because it's just too scary to talk about. So when I talk about suffering, I talk about it like when we're doing a massacre, like a really difficult class, and people are just working super hard and sweating and dying, and you're doing a plank and you're just sitting there feeling like you have to give up. And I start talking about this idea of pain versus suffering, and pain is necessary, to grow and to get stronger. You're not going to get stronger physically or mentally without going through some pain, but suffering is your choice, basically. Suffering is the way that you interpret the pain. Suffering is optional. And I know when I say that, for some people that helps, and for some people they're like, yeah, but you're not doing this plank right now. and there's a big difference between doing a plank and overcoming, terrible loss or going through something horrific, unspeakably terrible like the Holocaust. A very big difference between being able to talk about it and understand the concept of, yes, I realize that intellectually, if I change my interpretation of this pain, then I can relieve my suffering, but it's happening right now. It's kind of hard to really deal with it. I'll say ever since I had my baby girl, whenever I see or think of at all the idea of like a child dying, I think this would murder me. There's no way that I could ever get over it. And I know that there are plenty of people who have had that and have had to deal with it. And so please recognize, I'm talking from a place of massive privilege where I have lost people in my life, but they had fairly good, full lives before they went. And I would not say that I've had anything so horrible that it would have completely destroyed me. And I'm sure that it's going to happen someday. So maybe this is partly just some inspiration for my future self as well. But I'll take some words and some ideas from somebody who really knew about it, Viktor Frankl, who went through the Holocaust. And he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. So this is kind of adapted from somebody who wrote about this book. I haven't read it in like 20 years, but I remember it well enough. So he talks about his experience living in the concentration camp, and then he's got a therapeutic technique called logotherapy, which is essentially how do we derive meaning from pain and suffering, and how do we kind of use this meaning in like setting goals and kind of talking through it in a way that gives us direction. How do we use that to get past our suffering? So it's not really a linear narrative. He's not like this happened and then this happened and this happened, but he focused more like on the day-to-day experience of what it was like for him and for the other people that were in the camp. And he talked about the way that the typical person who was in the concentration camp passes through 3 mental stages: shock in the first few days, then apathy, and then emotional death. So you're basically kind of just trying to completely distance yourself from it. And disillusionment with life after somebody has been liberated. So in the first part of the book, it's like the experiences in the camp, and then he goes into explaining logotherapy and how his kind of ideas work to help get beyond this experience. And one of the cores in his philosophy is that our deepest desire is to find meaning in life. And if we can find meaning, then we can survive anything. And so a quote that he gives is, "It is one of the basic tenets of logotherapy that man's main concern is not to gain pleasure or avoid pain, but rather to see meaning in life. That is why man is even ready to suffer on the condition to be sure that his suffering has a meaning." And so that is kind of like what I like to say when you're doing the plank and, having somebody explain that to you. When you have the time and the space to internalize it and maybe even practice it is great. But it's another thing to really have to put it into practice, like right in that moment when the suffering is real. So Frankl found meaning in his experiences, and this was something that he developed and practiced and was able to do by deciding that he was going to use his suffering as an opportunity to make himself a better person. So instead of becoming apathetic and accepting that he was doomed, he chose to embrace the suffering. And this is one way that we really need to deal with and learn to overcome suffering, is to embrace it. So it is very common, and this is probably your experience when you're dealing with physical pain and physical suffering, and definitely maybe more subtly when you're dealing with emotional pain and suffering, is to try to fight against it. And so maybe it's some kind of denial, like this isn't happening, but it's like, when is this going to end? I can't believe that I'm dealing with this, and this isn't fair, and all of this like fighting against it. But when we embrace it and we kind of invite it in, then it transforms. In Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is another book by Shunryu Suzuki, he talks about this idea of when we meditate, we have these persistent thoughts, these sometimes often very annoying thoughts that kind of keep cropping up, and it's like a weed. And he calls this our mind weeds. And if you just kind of cover it over, like chop off the top, then it's just going to keep growing back and keep showing up. So the mind weed is something that seems on the surface to be, very much something we need to fight against. But he says what we can do is we can dig up these mind weeds and then bury them in the ground. And then he says, if you do this with an actual garden, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, but let's just assume that this is true. He says, if you do this in an actual garden, the plants are going to kind of get sustenance from the buried weed. And our minds are kind of the same way. We embrace the mind weed. We embrace the persistent thought in our meditation. We don't cover it up and pretend that it's not happening. We don't just do a quick chop off the top. We dig it up completely and then we bury it. And that sounds, no matter how I put that sounds like repression, but that's not the idea. The idea is embracing it and swallowing it up and taking it in and allowing it to become a part of us, which is going to be a very different feel from resisting, right? And of course, meditation, depending on how it's going, can feel very much like suffering, and we can have plenty of mind weeds, and it can feel like something that we're fighting against. It can very much feel like something that our body is fighting against as well. But when we embrace it, the physical discomfort, the mental discomfort, the persistent thoughts, we accept them, we embrace them, then we can kind of get sustenance and get growth. Even if this meditation right now doesn't feel like it's great, this is really food for our future meditation. And at the very least, that feeling of being able to embrace the suffering in this moment really does give us fuel and life for the next bout. So this is one way to find meaning in our experiences and our suffering, but it's going to depend on the individual. So he's embracing the suffering, and then according to Frankl, while a man's destiny in life is certainly affected by the circumstances in which he finds himself, he's ultimately free to choose his own path in life. Even the worst situation possible, we always have the freedom to choose our attitude towards life. And this is really what meditation is about on some level, is being able to accept our circumstances and to be able to decide how we again, what our attitude towards that is, or the direction that we want to take that in. So Frankl claims there are three ways to find meaning in life: through work, through love, and through suffering. And you don't have to choose one of these things. You can do any or all the above. So he kept his will to meaning, or his desire to live a meaningful life, alive through his 3 years in the concentration camps by focusing on the potential meanings that he could create for himself. So in addition to finding meaning in his suffering, he motivated himself by thinking about the work that he wanted to do after leaving the camp. He's kind of developing this theory, this idea of logotherapy, this specific way that he wants to help people. He found hope and love. The image of his wife helped him through many of his most difficult times. So he was able to use his work, love, and suffering to keep himself alive because he felt he was responsible for them and responsible to them. And that's a very interesting concept, right? It's like we are responsible for and to our suffering. And this is kind of like when I was talking last week about the idea of the ego, like what is the ego for? And if we're just fighting against it and we treat it like something that we need to always like just get rid of, then it has a very different feel from if we embrace it and kind of invite it in. It's the same thing with our suffering. If we invite it in and we recognize that we are responsible for it, not just like, oh, I keep making myself suffer. I'm responsible for my own suffering. Yes, that, but also like, I'm the caretaker for my suffering. Just like I'm the caretaker for my ego, right? My bigger self, my higher self is kind of here helping along my ego. And suffering is definitely the ego's domain. So our higher self is here to kind of help along and like take care of this suffering self that we have. So what we have to do, he says we can't understand the general meaning or what he calls the super meaning of life. Instead, we have to look for ways to make each individual moment valuable. And every person has a unique vocation that only they can accomplish, and they're responsible for undertaking this job. This also made me think of, what is this movie called? It's not A Wonderful Life, A Beautiful Life. Has anybody seen this? It's a classic movie that I believe is the Holocaust, where it's I believe it's an Italian actor's name. Anyways, there's a beautiful movie, and this man is there with his family, and he's got his kids, just a daughter. You know what I'm talking about, right? Do you see this?
This is the guy who won the Oscar and
Recently?
No, like
A long time ago. I don't know. I didn't see his Oscar speech. Anyways, this was a beautiful movie, horrible and beautiful, and he is like a father in the concentration camp who's making it his responsibility, or like his meaning in life, to get let's just say that it's his daughter through this whole experience. And so he's finding like these beautiful little moments, and surrounded by death and terrible suffering and the most unimaginable terrible things that you can imagine. But he's finding these little beautiful things to kind of entertain his daughter with and kind of keep her happy, and like he is therefore experiencing the same kind of joy as she is. And this is a really high kind of calling for us to be able to take on. It's like finding the beautiful little moments even within what can otherwise be an experience or a life that is totally full of suffering. And so he goes on to explain kind of how logotherapy works and all this stuff, but he ends the book by saying that man is that being who invented the gas chambers at Auschwitz. However, he is also that being who entered those gas chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer on his lips. And so he believes that while man is certainly capable of doing evil, no individual human must be evil. Every human has the capacity to change their behavior and attitude in every possible situation. And he reaffirms his belief as the basis for what he calls tragic optimism, the belief in the importance of saying yes in spite of everything. So, with that light opening to this meditation, in a minute we'll sit. And it can certainly be an arduous thing to sit totally still for a long time. I'll share an experience that after our previous subject matter is going to seem like nothing, but in our tests for the higher ranked tests, we have to meditate by sitting totally still for a certain amount of time. And so I remember for the Red Sash test, which is 2 hours long, I was sitting in a certain position, kind of like Sam is right now, but instead of doing the smart thing and sitting on a cushion that doesn't move, I was sitting on a beanbag chair. And if you ever sit on a beanbag chair, you know it kind of like shifts around a little bit. And I was sitting like this in Seiza with my knees, and they started to super slowly just slide away from each other just a tiny bit. And they settled in this position where my hips really needed to pop. You know how you just kind of like have to pop because it hurts so much. But I couldn't do that because I have to sit totally still. So I had a really nice first hour to this meditation, but then when my hips found themselves in this position, it was so painful that I was unable to get past the physical feeling, which really is a big part of our meditation on some level, as we're trying to, it's like a race between our body's ability to create itches and pain. It's a race between that and our ability to kind of shut down the senses and completely let go of that by just really centering our awareness on the breath. So I lost that race in dramatic fashion, and I'm sitting there the second hour of this meditation. Brutal, so painful, one of the worst experiences of my life. And I thought that I was going to vomit from the pain that I was in. I actually had this recurring thought. And when I just gutted it out for an hour, and then when my Sifu finally came in and let us out of the meditation, he asked us all, like, how was your meditation? And everyone else was like, it was really nice, sir. It was very peaceful. He got to me and he asked me, and I was like, sir, that was the worst experience of my life. It was awful. And sometimes meditations are going to be like that. Now, we're only going to meditate for a half an hour or even less. This is not going to be the most painful meditation experience that you have. But it might happen that you are sitting in a way that is just not working for you tonight. And so if you need to, you can, move and kind of pop your hip or whatever and get back to a comfortable position, but try to sit still. And if you can, again, you can find meaning in this, right? In the physical pain that you're experiencing. You can say to yourself, this is so that I can, grow beyond something, grow beyond the need to be free of physical pain, grow beyond the distraction. And if it's not physical pain, it's going to be something else. You'll have mental pain, you'll start to get hungry, whatever it is. So when we can in that moment find meaning and just recenter back on the breath, if we stop fighting against the suffering and the pain and instead kind of swallow it, bury it like a mind weed and get sustenance from that, then in the next couple of breaths of our meditation, it's not so bad. We recognize that there's a purpose to this. There's a purpose for this pain. There's a purpose for this suffering. And what it is helping us to grow. Even if this meditation doesn't feel great, the next one should be better because of it. Sit comfortably. So, remember, you can sit however is comfortable for you as long as your spine is straight. I like to sit with my knees on the ground because my hips don't cooperate with sitting cross-legged, but if you're super flexible, that is wonderful. You just want your knees even with or below your hips so that your legs don't fall asleep. Spine straight, including your shoulders rolling back. Your hands can be anywhere, but usually palm up by the hips and the chin parallel to the ground to keep your spine nice and straight. Close eyes. So your eyes are slightly upturned, and it can be like you're trying to gaze at the third eye, just above your eyebrows in the center of your forehead. Remember not to let your eyes cross. So you just have a gentle, slightly raised position for the eyes. We'll do a couple of deep breaths together. Start with all the breath out. Breathe in through the nose. Hold for a few seconds at the top and breathe out. Breathing from the belly. Hold. Out. Try to lengthen and deepen the breath in. Hold. Out. Two more breaths. Remember not to strain the breath, just a nice full but still more or less relaxed breath out. Try to get a more full exhale so you have more space for the inhale. Hold. And out. Finish with a double exhalation. And then just let your breath come in. And let your breath go out. So we're no longer trying to manipulate the breath, we're just feeling it. When your mind wanders, just let that thought go by returning to the breath and try to make it an enjoyable experience. And just relaxing back with the next breath. And if you do have that persistent thought bothering you, nagging you, you have a hard time letting go, just remind yourself of the purpose that it's serving. Swallow it up, accept, embrace it, and then move on to the next breath.